Let's face it, the first 3 months of the fantasy football season are basically just a warm up to what is about to go down, and that is the playoffs. Throughout the records, everything that has already happened up until now doesn't really matter. If you have the right players right now, you can win it all. And this year, it looks like running backs are going to be the ones to lead you to a championship. But which ones? Let's go through the top 12 running backs for the fantasy playoffs, and I'm going to rank them in order based on not only how they performed so far, how they're projected to perform, and their schedule from week 15 through 17. And you might be surprised at a couple of names that aren't on this list. All right, let's spare the drama. Let's start with number one. The top running back for the fantasy playoffs is going to be the same guy who's been the top running back all season long. Yeah, it's Saquon Barkley. How could it not be? After he ripped off another big run to give him another big game last week, he's got 1,392 rushing yards on the season. The only RB who's even close is Derrick Henry, and he's played one more game than Barkley so far. It's kind of funny now that some people were fading Barkley as an early round pick because of Jalen Hurts. Like, yeah, he's going to vulture some touchdowns. Running backs behind Jalen Hurts aren't really fantasy friendly enough because, that tush push, it's still in effect. And yeah, it is. Right now, Jalen Hurts, 11 touchdowns rushing in 11 games. Guess what? It doesn't matter. Saquon Barkley already has 10 rushing touchdowns. I think we could say that the touchdown upside is still there. Again, only Derrick Henry and David Montgomery have more rushing touchdowns than Saquon Barkley. So he's going off not just in terms of rushing yards and also touchdowns. Oh, and he's one of the best receiving running backs in all of football. And honestly, the schedule really doesn't even matter. We'll say right now, week 15 against Pittsburgh, it's not ideal, but it doesn't matter to Saquon Barkley at Washington. That's actually a pretty nice one. And then week 17, it really couldn't get much better. Gets the Dallas Cowboys in that weak run defense. So Barkley really could carry teams to championships. At number two, let's go with Bijan Robinson, a guy who has finally emerged as the type of elite fantasy running back that we've been hoping and waiting for. Before the Falcons bye the previous 4 weeks, Bijan Robinson came in as the RB3 in PPR leagues. The only running backs ahead of him are Saquon Barkley, of course, and then Josh Jacobs, and that really is because of all the touchdowns he's been getting. Bijan, of course, an elite receiver out of the backfield. As of right now in the season, he's 4th in receptions among all running backs. But what's really best for his fantasy value we've seen lately is Tyler Allgeier's kind of getting phased out. In fact, the last game before the Falcons were off, he didn't even touch the ball at all, not partly due to game script because they did get blown out by the Broncos, but besides that, the fact that he was not converting on those goal line carries and those short yardage runs, which is kind of why they put Allgeier in there, maybe has made them reconsider, or maybe just finally realize, hey, Bijan Robinson is the most talented running back in the NFL outside of possibly Saquon Barkley. Why don't we just put him on the field more? And it really wouldn't be too shocking for Bijan to finish as the RB1 in fantasy playoffs because look at his schedule from 15 through 17. The Raiders, the Giants, and then at Washington. And number three, let's put Jahmyr Gibbs in there. Right now, Gibbs is the RB5 in fantasy points per game in PPR leagues. Anybody who was worried about drafting Jahmyr Gibbs early because of David Montgomery's presence, also regretting that decision. There's obviously enough room for both these guys to feast because, yeah, Monty is getting a lot of touchdowns and Gibbs has gotten just as many. And he's the one who's getting those receptions out of the backfield and he rips off the long runs and he's a do-it-all back. And Gibbs' schedule is actually better than those first two backs. Gets Buffalo, Chicago, and San Francisco in those final 3 weeks. And those sound like tough matchups, but purely against running backs in terms of yards and fantasy points allowed, they're actually all bottom third. And let's face it, this 49ers team that Lions are going to face in week 17, this is a team that now maybe won't even be in the playoffs. They are hurting across the board, especially on defense. So that might wind up being a much easier game for him than you think. At number four, look, if Alvin Kamara were on a better offense, I might have to move him higher because his schedule is so good and he is the everything for this Saints offense right now, not including Taysom Hill. You already know Kamara is not just a great runner, but one of the leading receivers. And I don't just mean among running backs. I mean, he's just one of the leading receivers in the game. His 73 targets on the season, that would rank him top 15 among wide receivers. As it stands, those targets and the 55 receptions on the year, top among all running backs, and that's not going to change. Chris Olave, it doesn't look like he's coming back. Already know Rashid Shaheed's not coming back, but Me's not coming back. They're going to need to use Kamara as much as ever before. And during the playoffs, he also gets Washington, gets Green Bay, and ends with the Raiders. Speaking of running backs that play receiver just as well as RB, go Devon Achane at number 5. This year, we have seen exactly what we wanted from Devon Achane, and that's Raheem Mostert basically disappearing. Man has been non-existent, and not even because of injury. He just is starting to look like an old running back. He's fumbling it. He's not scoring touchdowns. He's not even being used anymore, and that means Devon Achane is the backfield here for the Dolphins, and he's also one of their more effective receivers. And his season-long stats are even a little misleading because you remember Tua Tagovailoa missed several games because of that concussion within an IR. But since Tua has come back from injury and this offense has really started to click, in those 5 games, Devon Achane has been the RB3. He's already posted 6 games over 20 fantasy points, and I think there's a lot more to come. As far as the playoffs go, nothing will change. I doubt it. This is a team still fighting to make the playoffs themselves. And although at Houston, that's a tough run defense, but again, when you have a running back that catches so many passes, it kind of negates that. That San Francisco defense, already said, not too worried about. And the final game here, at least for most fantasy leagues in week 17, they're going to get Cleveland. Now, if you happen to play in a non-PPR league, you might say you drop Achane a spot or two below some of the running backs I'm about to mention, but you really don't want to go too low because, again, he's always got that touchdown upside, and the fact that he gets both rushing and receiving yardage, that boosts him up. Before I get to the rest of the list, let me just remind you too, you're looking ahead to the playoffs, getting your team ready, making those trades, whatever you need to do, setting your lineups. Also say your NFL picks on Underdog. If you haven't tried it yet, you get a free pick for a new customer special. It's Brock Purdy just getting yard in his comeback for week 13. That's right, you sign up for the very first time on Underdog, you take this free pick, it's Brock Purdy going higher than 0.5 total yards, and then you also get a deposit match up to $1,000 worth of bonus cash if you use code ENDGAME when you check out. Now, there's probably some names you're still waiting to hear. You're going to have to be patient and wait because right now, at number 6, it's Josh Jacobs. You already know he's been scoring touchdowns in bunches. Look, he's not going to cash in 3 times every week, but he could score any given week. We know that this Green Bay offense is basically now revolving around him, not Jordan Love in the passing game, and it's working out for him. His usage and efficiency are looking basically like they were 2 years ago when he had his career season with the Raiders. 4.7 yards per carry, and he's getting more involved as a pass catcher out of the backfield. Now, one thing to look for here is that Jacobs has been a lot more effective and, of course, scoring more touchdowns when this team is in the lead and running ahead in losses that they've had. Not that the Packers have lost much, but he hasn't scored a single time here. So looking at the schedule, this does matter for a guy like Jacobs. And the Week 15 matchup at Seattle should be fine there. It might be a close game, but I don't feel like they're going to be down. Week 16 is the Saints. That's definitely a great spot for him. Week 17, maybe a slight concern here because they get the Vikings. Not only are the Vikings a good team, of course, division rival there, but the last time the Packers did play the Vikings, Jacobs only got 9 carries for 51 yards. He can do better, but again, this is a tough run defense, a tough matchup. So I would be a little worried that maybe Jacobs doesn't go off for your championship game, but you can't drop him too low. You're still wondering, where's Derrick Henry? Here he is, number 7. I'm going to go with the king. Derrick Henry finally did not score a touchdown in week 12, but it's okay. He made up for it with 140 rushing yards. But this is also the thing with Derrick Henry. Didn't catch a single pass, and we know that that's just not going to be something that we expect from him. And it doesn't usually matter because he scores pretty much every week. He goes for big yardage pretty much every week. But this is also a player like a Josh Jacobs, and in fact, probably even more so, that is game script dependent. If the Ravens happen to be down, he does get phased out a little bit and Justice Hill comes in, or they're just going to pass the ball. The reason I have Henry down a little bit in the rankings here is, first of all, I know some leagues actually play week 14 for the playoffs, or just week 14 is really important for you to lead into the playoffs. And the Ravens are one of those teams, unfortunately, that are on bye in week 14. And then going from week 15 on, they're going to have the 3rd toughest schedule against running backs. Week 15 is a game against the Giants. That's a great spot, right? Don't get me wrong. But then Pittsburgh and that tough run defense in week 16. And then in week 17, a road game against Houston. I'm not going to say I necessarily expect that the Ravens will be losing those games, but they're going to be closely contested, and you never know. The last time that the Ravens played the Steelers was back in week 1. Henry did score a short touchdown, but only had 65 yards on the ground. In the end, this really doesn't necessarily matter because if you have King Henry, you just start him, no questions asked. But I don't know that he will necessarily have his best 3 games in the final 3 weeks. Now, I'll tell you, number 8 is a player I'm struggling with still as of right now. Where to rank him, what to do with Breece Hall. Now, on the one hand, any given week, Breece Hall has the upside to be the RB1, right? I know people have been pretty disappointed overall with the body of work he's given you. Again, not through any fault of his own, just a lot of things going on there in that Jets organization. For his part, Breece has been good, but really not great. In fact, only 100-yard rushing game on the season, and somehow only averaging 4.2 yards per carry. Now, he's made up for that a lot as a receiver. He's had some big games in terms of receiving output, and that balances it out. But overall, you've got to have some questions about this Jets offense and what's going to happen down the stretch. It also doesn't make me feel too good to see that now, going ahead of week 13, got some knee soreness. I don't know if that's going to bother him this week going forward. What's going to happen here? So, just the uncertainty here is why it's hard to rank Hall. I will say I can't get too low on him, assuming he just plays out the rest of the schedule, because the Jets have the best schedule possible for a running back. According to Mike Clay of ESPN, the Jets have the easiest schedule for a running back. That starts in week 15 with the Jaguars, followed by the Rams, and then the Buffalo run defense. And yes, Buffalo still has a very bad run defense. Can't say there's no risk involved here, but as of right now, things standing with Breece Hall still the lead back there, clearly. If he's healthy and the Jets don't just go full tank here, which I don't necessarily expect, you got to think Breece Hall is at least a top 10 running back the rest of the way. We're all the way down to number 9. Here's Christian McCaffrey. We might have even more questions about CMC than Breece or any of these other running backs because this does not look like the Christian McCaffrey we're used to. He's averaging 3.5 yards per carry on the season. Granted, his season has only been a couple of games so far, but we've seen him now come back, get a full workload, and just not look like the same explosive runner we're used to. This offense as a whole is struggling, and this isn't just this one game that Brock Purdy missed. This offense has been really inconsistent with or without CMC. In fact, they actually looked a lot better early in the season with Jordan Mason leading the way. This could honestly go one of two ways. Either McCaffrey gets his footing under him, gets a little bit more confidence, return from injury, and the 49ers figure things out to make a push and try to get that wild card spot at least, and we see this offense look like the offense that we've been used to. Or we see the opposite and we just see it continue the way it is. This team, start to fold it in, and maybe the worst case scenario here, honestly, is they just decide to sit CMC out and not risk further injury. If you're looking purely at the numbers for McCaffrey as a runner and receiver and this offense, we're really just ranking him this high based on name value. But again, this is Christian McCaffrey, a guy that you can't just count out after playing a couple of games this year. So I'm going to tentatively stick him in the top 10, just barely. But number 10, it's Joe Mixon, a guy who has been performing better than a lot of these other running backs, but I got to move him down because of the schedule. He's also a player that isn't going to be in there in week 14. The Texans have a bye, then the Miami defense in week 15, Kansas City in week 16, and then Baltimore in week 17. That's as tough as you can get, especially for those final 2 games. KC and Baltimore are statistically 2 top 5 rush defenses. And for what it's worth, Joe Mixon, the last 3 weeks, he's only averaging 3 yards per carry. In fact, his receiving work in that one game really has bailed him out, as well as scoring touchdowns. You gotta wonder if now the carries he's had so far this year in Houston, being back to being a workhorse, is it starting to wear on him? What's going on in this offense? But again, this is Joe Mixon. This is a guy who's been proven. This is a guy who's been great all year. Don't want to make too much of just the last couple of games. Now at 11, here's Chase Brown. Yeah, I know it feels like we could put him much higher than even some of these other players I've mentioned already, but let's be realistic here. The Bengals are also a team that are pass happy, and as much opportunity as Chase Brown has gotten, it's not guaranteed. Zach Taylor did throw out a comment about wanting to ease the load and maybe have some other guys get touches. I don't buy that because who is going to do this here? Who do they even have? Khalil Herbert, I really doubt he's all of a sudden going to inherit a bunch of carries. So it's probably going to be all Chase Brown here every down as a runner, as a receiver, which has really propped him up in terms of his fantasy value. And this is a great offense that is still clicking. The schedule isn't too bad for the Bengals as well. At Tennessee, at home against Cleveland, and then the final game is going to be against Denver, which will be a tough one. But this Bengals offense is so hot right now, it almost doesn't really matter. And then number 12, the final spot is going to go to Chuba Hubbard. That might surprise some people because you're like, what about Jonathan Brooks? Well, I'll tell you about Jonathan Brooks. I don't think he gets involved any more than a guy like Miles Sanders was. Let's remember, just a couple weeks ago, the Panthers paid Chuba big to be the guy for reasons I still don't understand. I mean, he's been great, but still, it's kind of a baffling move from a business standpoint. But the point is, Chuba is the guy here. Jonathan Brooks, they have no reason to push him out there and give him so many touches. This is a rookie coming off a major injury. They're going to probably just get his feet wet a little bit, but Chuba is still getting the vast majority of the touches here, and he has just been really good all season long. And it just so happens he's got the sixth easiest schedule for running backs during the fantasy playoffs. In week 15, it's the Dallas Cowboys. Week 16, it's the Cardinals. And then in week 17, potentially for your fantasy championship, it's the Tampa Bay Bucks. And if things go the way I expect this coming weekend against Tampa Bay, you're going to see what Chuba does, and you're going to say, yeah, I want that in my lineup for the championship. And look, let's give some credit to Dave Canales. He's got Bryce Young looking like an actual NFL quarterback. This team is finally respectable once again. Now, I can't end this without telling you about the running backs who did not make the list because there's some high profile names, some RB1s that you're wondering how can they not be on here. I'll tell you who the guy is that was actually closest, my RB13. It's Tony Pollard. He has a great schedule as well. The Bengals, the Colts, and the Cowboys the final 3 weeks. He's been close to a workhorse when Tyjae Spears is out. And even when Spears plays, he's still getting enough carries. He's been very effective. I really like Pollard down the stretch. I think you just continue to ride him. Jonathan Taylor does not make the cut here. This offense is just different with Anthony Richardson. It really should help JT. The inconsistency is the concern here. It's not about any other running back. It's not even about AR, like vulturing touchdowns or anything like that. It's just, is this offense going to be running from behind more often than not? Also not making the cut, Kyren Williams. Finally got in the end zone again after a 4-game absence. On the same hand, that game, he fumbled twice. That makes 4 on the season. Now I know Sean McVay is pretty loyal to his guys, especially at the running back position, but there is always Blake Corum kind of lurking there if Kyren continues to cough it up. And for some reason, Kyren has just been completely not involved whatsoever as a receiver. Probably because Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are both back and playing, but those guys were there last year and Kyren was still involved. So I don't know why Kyren's just not catching any passes at all anymore. That limits his ceiling. And since both Kupp and Nacua have been back, Kyren Williams hasn't even been a top 15 fantasy running back on a weekly basis, so I can't put him in the top 12. And then finally, I got to mention Kenneth Walker. I like Kenneth Walker still, but he has not looked like an elite back lately. Under 4 yards per carry now, and this offense is just a lot more pass heavy. So Walker is still a guy I'm keeping in my lineup more often than not. I just don't know that he's going to really help and be anything close to a league winner. We're always trying to help you get ahead of the game, but first things first, you need help for week 13 to win. Check out this week's playlist.